and he has a greater interest in getting there than I do.
I suppose he does, but there's no point in asking.
Why not?
Because he doesn't row.
He doesn't row?
No, he doesn't row.
Ah, I see what you mean.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of Spoiled Games. I'm Adam Sessler. Before we get to our discussion about BioShock Infinite, I would like to just impress upon you, the show is called Spoiled Games. We are going to talk about this game in depth, and everything is fair territory. That means spoilers. If you have not finished BioShock Infinite, do yourself a favor. Do not watch the show until you are done. So go, play the game now. All right. With that, I would like to introduce our panel. Kevin VanOrd, senior editor at GameSpot.com. Thanks for being here.
My pleasure to be here.
And editor-in-chief of Giant Bomb, my friend, Jeff Gerstmann.
Great to be here.
So, guys, thank you so much. BioShock, one hell of a game. I think that's kind of one of the safe assessments you can make about it.
Yeah, definitely. It was, I ended up playing it across 2 sessions. It was like, and there was a week, like basically before PAX and after PAX, where it was like, okay, I spent 7 hours getting into the part where it gets a little weird. Basically got up to like the gunsmith stuff, and then had to wait a whole week before I could play the rest. And meanwhile, like people, like leaked copies are getting out there, and there's spoilers going around. I'm like worried that someone's going to tell me what the ending is before I've gotten to it myself, and that didn't happen. But it was weird to like sit on the first half of that game for a week and go like, I think that the bloody nose means this, and this is probably what's going to happen, and then go, oh wait, no, I was completely wrong.
Yeah, I got to do it over a weekend, but after playing so many games in this first quarter of 2013, it was the one time where I couldn't keep myself from going back and playing just a little bit more.
Yeah, I'm actually playing again for the 3rd time now, I guess, because I wanted to. I'm still like piecing together. There are so many thematic ties to everything else. Like one bit of dialogue now. Oh, this ties into this thing over here, and this ties into that thing over there. And so, like even now, I'm still piecing voxophones together and trying to get everything I can, which is unusual for me. I don't typically go back and play games I've finished like this.
No, and I'm kind of itching. There's almost just a tactile, sense of like I just want to feel that game one more time.
Yeah.
But so this first half, we're going to be doing this as a 2-parter. But we're going to talk about sort of the story of the game because there's a lot of that.
Oh, yeah.
And talk a little bit about the world and, of course, Elizabeth, because they all kind of interrelate. But in terms of story, the first thing that struck me is if you really pull yourself back, you can see how there's various levels. But it really does a good job of not superimposing very conventional game narrative with, like, sort of the 5-part structure, as we've seen so many other games do.
Yeah, it's really impressive how it gets out there and gets into that stuff. And I think like BioShock, it works on several different levels because it's got the setting, it's got the man, it's got the ethos, but instead of Andrew Ryan and his whole objectivist slant, they've filled it with this other thing that provides that awesome backdrop that permeates every little piece of art around the world. You're like looking at this and viewing it through that lens of like, yeah, what if the founders of America were worshipped as if they were gods? Like, what would that look like? And it's completely crazy.
And it looks like Columbia.
Right, yeah.
And the game trusts you, which I think is really interesting because it doesn't thrust you into the action right away. It gives you time. You take the boat, you go up to the lighthouse, you get to Columbia, and you spend a lot of time just walking around. You can play the carnival games, you can do all this stuff. It doesn't impress the action upon you right away, so it sets the tone really early on for what to expect.
And it's like a great little tutorial too.
Yeah,
exactly.
You get in there and go through the carnival games, and you're like, okay, I get a sense of what these powers are going to be like later on.
Now, what was it? Because you do kind of go through, as I've almost termed it, the birth canal. You go up in a rocket. Look at that however you want from a sexual perspective, and then suddenly you find yourself sort of underground in this very religious-looking area. You get baptized, and then you find yourself inside of Columbia. But at that moment, there is that sense of awe just at the way everything looks.
Yeah.
I can't remember the first time I played that when it became clear that this is just very much on the surface, kind of like, as I put it, in America that never existed.
Yeah, well, there is that moment where if you haven't pieced things together, you're certainly going to when you walk up to the stage and the crier's up on the stage and you get the option to throw the ball at either the couple that's been brought out or the announcer himself, and then they label you as the false prophet and off things go. And that moment of violence, too, is very striking.
Yeah.
Because everything is so
tranquil.
and crispy and white and
very bright, colorful, and yeah.
And then suddenly the very first bit of action that you actually see is blood everywhere.
The
with
face
this,
going right into
thing,
the air hose.
But even before that, you know, when you come in after the brief baptism and you see people praying, and that the garden is gorgeous with the hummingbirds and things like that. But they're revering, George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, and it's really freaky in a way. Like they're starting in with like, okay, well this is historical, and then suddenly, and the angel came down and presented to you the sword. And it's like, whoa.
They're just creating. It's like we're too American for America.
Yeah.
We need to have Sky America.
Yeah.
It's
really
the ultimate collision of faith and nationalism at this stage. You know, far more than I've ever seen.
And how many people, myself included, had to go on Wikipedia and go, well, the Boxer Rebellion was about what now?
Right.
And it is, and once again, that was also about a sense of cultural imperialism, except the Chinese were seeing it that way. I mean, it is. I love the way that it invokes all these things, it turns America into a religion, but it never kind of sits down and fully explicates it. It just kind of, and if they wanted to go deeper in it, if that was their original intention, I don't know if it would have served them well.
Yeah, I think that there's a real economy there. I mean, there is a lot to take in, but it's only enough to really kind of fill out this universe in a very specific way. You know, there's a lot of other places they could have taken it, but you get the impression they're like, this part isn't necessarily in service of gameplay. I would love to actually know at what point did they sit down, look at everything they had in terms of what this world was, and go like, okay, this is mainline narrative, this has to be explicitly explained, and this is stuff that we can put into the voxophones about the hows and whys of how the world was created and that sort of stuff. Because that seems like the trickiest split of all, right? Is figuring out like, how much do we want to make sure that 100% of our player base is understanding and getting, like how much do we want to hit them over the head with this stuff, and then how much is the, oh, you're exploring, so we're going to tell you why all these modern songs are in this 1912 city and that sort of stuff.
Well, and there's stuff that they even seem to leave behind, like vigors are never really fully developed within this game in the way that they were in plasmids were in the original BioShock. And that's, I've seen come up a lot, people talking about vigors don't really necessarily seem to fit in with this world and seem more at service of the gameplay than with the narrative.
But then, if you want, and we'll get to the ending at the end of this, but you do get the sense that the ending kind of mandates that, these things just seem to be replicating in infinite ways.
Yeah.
But I think the other sequence, which this is the part that I think really blew me away, is you have this incredible sense of adventure and you have action, you get Elizabeth out of the tower, and then it stops again. And you're on the boardwalk.
No, it's me, Elizabeth.
And it just, once again, has that confidence that if you really do it right, you can stretch out for a ridiculous amount of time just going through, seeing once again that really noxious racial dichotomy that they created in Columbia.
Yeah, and they give you, it's a great chance for them to really introduce you to Elizabeth. I mean, the whole sequence of walking through the different rooms and seeing her basically just being like every young, pretty, sheltered girl of just like, I just want to go to Paris. Like, like, I don't, how many times I've heard people, that's their whole life goal.
Jeff, take me to Paris.
All right, fine. Yeah, we'll go to Paris again. I thought that was a great little touch. And then to see her kind of get out into the world and experience that stuff, I guess, more or less for the first time, or the infinite number, whatever. It's a really amazing moment, and I think that's the thing that cements Elizabeth as such a meaningful character.
Yeah, the moment where she's dancing on the stage on the beach is really impressive to me, especially because it's so clean and beautiful. And this, to me, this is like the moment where you actually see why these people buy into this culture and how idyllic it really is. Because it's truly beautiful and it truly is a utopia in that moment, and you can see Elizabeth tasting her freedom for the first time, and it's very beautiful actually to watch her dance.
I ended up looking into that with a certain amount of darkness, because at that point you have seen so much violence that I'm looking at these people of privilege and just thinking like, I should smash every single one of these people.
and they see, and you've just gone through, like, the Songbird's been chasing you, and like there's that period for about 10 minutes before everyone notices that the tower that Elizabeth was in is slowly collapsing. It's like, well, where are you people? And then there's that other aspect, which I really only caught on my second playthrough, which is, how does Battleship Bay work?
Where's the water come from?
Where's the water coming from? And
they're collecting it out of the clouds. Okay, sure. There's probably some science. You know, you could science it out in your mind if you wanted to.
But I mean, that becomes almost like sort of normal and accepted because you're so caught up in that wonderful, like those small touches.
Yeah.
And they do try to explain it a little bit with one of those. I forget what the machines are called. The kind of Nickelodeon type machines where you're looking down. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So they do try to throw some explanation into that. They, not many stones left unturned in that regard.
Yeah.
So with this story, obviously you then have a confrontation with Slade, but then things start to go into a very interesting direction once you get down into the shanty town, which I thought was one of the best transitions of the game. Just slowly. For the first time, I felt I was in an elevator, not for the sake of streaming in the next level.
Right, and then they do that, a handful of times. I mean, when you're launching up to the city for the first time, there's a lot of great windows in that game.
Yeah.
Where you're just like watching stuff, going like, oh man, whatever I'm seeing here, there's a lot of bad stuff out there.
But you get down there, and then you had that transition when suddenly what felt like it was just kind of a discourse on how ugly the racism was at the beginning of the 20th century. It's like, oh no, now we're going to go metaphysical, and you shifted everything around.
No.
Dead is dead, Elizabeth.
Dead is dead.
What? How the hell did...
I see heads.
And I see tails.
It's all a matter of perspective.
Why are you following us? Who sent you? Comstock? What do you want
What
from...
do you see here, from this angle?
Dead.
Listen.
And that angle?
Alive.
Booker. Shen Lin.
The body's gone.
It was that moment where, I mean, from the beginning of the game, you kind of get the impression they're like, okay, well, we know who the good guys and the bad guys are in this naturally, and then you move to that other reality and go like, oh no, they're both sides are equally
Bad.
evil when in power.
Once the power comes, once somebody has control over that narrative, which is where I really started to see that you get that in the Slade sequence, that whoever's in control gets to control the narrative, and so they get to write things in their favor, and that kind of going through the tear and changing everything, you just gave the power of storytelling to someone else.
Right, yeah.
I wonder though, do you think, and I've heard this accusation before, do you think that was sort of the easy way out from a narrative perspective? Do you think there's any fear in anybody's, was there fear in the development process in saying, we don't want people to think that we're just excoriating, for example, the United States or Christianity, so we need to show another aspect to the story?
Well, I think that they don't necessarily, I don't think that those things necessarily go in the United States' favor or in the favor of Christianity either. Once they make that flip, to me it is very much about the kind of the racial lines, and I think that ends up being a little more daring. I think the easy way out would have been for them to just say like, oh, these racist white people, they're so terrible. You and your white guilt sitting at home playing this in your underwear, you're terrible. Like that would have actually probably been the easiest way to go. And to make that flip, I'd be like, wait, no, everyone is kind of equally terrible.
But also, you get that sense that the good guys might be, or at least they're not regarding you as Booker DeWitt is all that good when you've been kind of captured and Daisy's there and just kind of pushes you right off their airship.
Right.
I mean, you get the sense that nothing is very stable here. And of course, that sense of destabilization is even more underscored with the tears and the fact that reality just keeps on shifting under your feet.
Yeah. Once you go through the tears, it's kind of like all bets are off, right? You just, you don't know what would be different, and I thought they handled that stuff really well.
Well, and then you start walking through, you start people getting lined up and getting shot by all the rebels. And it really does evoke images of the Vietnam War, of like a lot of that kind of, that savagery of revenge that tends to happen from the dispossessed when things go, just
and then just the notion that despite Booker DeWitt being a hero in this timeline, that you showing up, just not fitting into that narrative, and all of a sudden, everyone on every side just wants you out of the picture.
That has to be one of the best moments I've ever had in a game, where you just pick up the phone and it's Daisy. She's like,
I saw you die, Booker. Saw it with my own eyes.
Fitzroy. Listen, I got you your guns. I'm here for my airship.
But my Booker DeWitt died for the Vox Populi. You either an imposter or a ghost. My Booker DeWitt was a hero to the cause, a story to tell your children. You just complicate the narrative.
In the more conventional games, even in the original BioShock, you had these characters that were kind of developed, and they ended up being a boss somehow. And no, that Fink does present challenges through his section of game, but he's just disposed of very quickly by Daisy.
Yeah, and that's true of almost, I mean, everything that seems like it could have been set up for a boss never happens. There's no Songbird boss. There's no, I mean, Lady
But Songbird
Comstock
gets a good moment.
Yeah, he does get it.
Everyone gets a good moment.
Yeah. And I think, yeah, you're right. Like Comstock, Lady Comstock ends up being like the, kind of the
she's
closest
the only
closest
closest
boss
thing to a boss.
That
in
to me
game,
just is, it has to be a reaction to the original BioShock and that last boss fight there and some of the combat stuff there of being like really just the worst parts of those games.
Well, I think it's the fundamental problem for a lot of games is that there's this expectation of having some denouement with the boss fight because that's what movies do. You always have that battle,
right?
And it's always the least satisfying part of almost any game I've played in recent memory.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that by kind of getting away from those basic gaming tropes, like I think the game's a lot less predictable for it. And that's awesome, because the first time you see Songbird, you're like, oh, I'm gonna have to go through this fight later. And looking at the way the combat works, I don't know that I necessarily want to fight a flying thing in this game. That'll probably be a bummer. And then you get to Songbird's moment, you're like, oh, actually this is pretty cool. Like they did something really.
Yeah, they actually turn it around.
Yeah.
So suddenly Songbird's on your side. And you don't actually fight Songbird. He's actually, fighting on your behalf.
Yeah, is that there's always something I guess that was another nice thing is that a lot of the bigger enemies, there's something horribly tragic about them as well.
Oh God,
if you listen to the handyman,
the handyman story
it's pretty rough.
Well, like somebody's just like, "Don't do this to me." It's like, oh my, It's fascinating how that undercuts a lot of the pleasure. Like it makes the violence feel all the more kind of unpleasant.
And just the way they underscore the violence. I mean, with audio and stuff like that. As you're getting kills, just having those string stabs and just like the little musical accompaniments that are with that.
It really is an act of design.
Awesome. Awesome. That stuff is so well done.
So with Daisy, I mean, I think that was a huge transitional moment. All of a sudden, Elizabeth, she sneaks in. She was so shocked at her kind of passive agency in the death of Chen Lin.
Oh, yeah.
But then we have this transition where, no, she willfully goes through the vent and stabs Daisy in the back. I mean, that was another one of those, like, oh, this character's going to grow up alongside of me.
Right, yeah. And when you think about the first time you encounter violence in that game after you've rescued her and she just goes running off, she grows up pretty quickly, gets used to that whole thing.
I mean, one of the, not to read too much into it, but it's Ken Levine and his team, so I'm going to go ahead and read into it that when you're going into the tower to rescue Elizabeth, and you're looking at sort of how she matures, the spike in her powers comes with her first menstruation, blood. Yeah. And then she stabs Daisy, which is another act of her bloodletting, and then she cuts her hair, she puts on, her somewhat mother's dress, and she suddenly looks like a more womanly and sexualized character. And to me, that was one of the darkest things that I saw in the game, is that almost this essential undercurrent of violence for growth.
Right.
Well, and then you get to see that manifested at the very, very end of the game when you have all these Elizabeths with you, and you see all these different looks of Elizabeth and realize how far she's gone from the beginning to the end in terms of the character model. And the
or even 1984 Elizabeth, kind of old woman Elizabeth, overlooking this burning city. You kind of see where it goes for her, or where it could go for her.
Or where it could go for her. No, that section of game, I mean, if you look at it, I guess on one level, it's still Gilligan's Island.
Right.
We're just trying to get out of here and go to Paris. Songbird comes, and that's when the game took the transition I was not expecting, when you're suddenly in this future.
Right.
And here's Elizabeth, who feels so betrayed, and it's a world without hope. She wants to have everyone just kind of I guess
and at that point, And at that point, you're not necessarily sure which timeline you're in anymore. Like what is going on.
My father dreamt of a flood of fire. We were given Eden, and we turned it into Sodom.
So, but when you do suddenly discover the Elizabeth of the future, I believe it's in 1984. You can start to see that there. I mean, that might be the reveal of reveals.
Totally, yeah. I mean, prior to the release, they show the tear with the Revenge of the Jedi and all that sort of stuff, and that was a cool moment in that reveal, and it was a cool moment in the game. But compared to 84, compared to looking at that, you're like, okay, all right.
There is that one indication at the very beginning of Infinite where he's in that kind of dreamy sequence where he's in his office and he opens the door and you can see the attack on New York.
Yeah.
never thought that's how it would man. I thought it'd be something more conventional, like I'm propelled into the future. I went through a tear, and New York's under attack by Comstock, and no, it's actually Elizabeth. I mean, how do you read what happens to her? I mean, is she really just kind of Comstock's protege at that point?
That's how I kind of looked at it. I figured that he has been successful. She has now become totally the seat of the prophet, and she is essentially the new prophet. Because at this point, there'd be no need for the siphon for her, correct? So she would have the same kind of full prophet capabilities that Comstock had.
Yeah, more or less. I mean, kind of those powers of probability, or and then also being able to kind of manifest the sorts of things that would result in fire raining out of the sky and sort of that thing.
But apparently more self-awareness than Comstock ever showed, at least.
Yeah, I mean,
or at least that moment of regret, right? Like, here it is, she's completed the task, looking at it burning, like, maybe I should have stayed with it. Like, maybe I should have waited for Booker.
I mean, that was the thing. I don't know how to read her. Is she aware of the multiple possibilities and how this whole thing could have played out? Is she like Dr. Manhattan from Watchmen? Because she seems to be expecting Booker. The whole thing. I mean,
she implies that she's using like the last of her energy to bring Booker into this reality to then send him back.
What is this?
It's for her. She'll know how to read it.
What does it say?
It's advice.
Advice on what?
How not to become me.
Comstock, who is presented with the same kind of dread as Andrew Ryan in the original BioShock, really kind of dissipates, even well before you realize that you are just another possibility of Comstock.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. It's. I think as you start to unravel his story and the things that he has done, even before the kind of the big reveal about his true nature, when you kind of get into his story and how he's kind of, at least conceptually, fabricating a lot of this stuff. I mean, I guess he technically was at Wounded Knee, but certainly wasn't Comstock when he was there. But watching the way he has built these monuments to himself, you get a sense that he is weak when you look at that stuff. When you start finding the Vox phones and all this other stuff, when you're finding the tears about how he is sterile, and then where did this child come from, and all this other stuff, you go like, okay, there's.
When that his wife didn't like him.
Right.
It was furious with him for having a child that wasn't her own.
Right.
I thought underscored, I think, sort of gameplay-wise, I thought that the fight in the graveyard was one, it didn't pop as well as some of the others, but the whole sense of the mother and this just fury about how she got wrapped up in his storytelling and so much against her will.
She's the most tragic figure in the game, I think.
Yeah.
I am not your husband's bastard. I am his victim. My days of victimhood are done. We must forgive each other. Because there's one far worse than you, Ryan.
So let's get to the ending. I mean, did either of you see that one coming?
Half of it, maybe. I think I saw, Comstock is Elizabeth's father, like Anna is Elizabeth kind of thing coming. There was enough foreshadowing in a lot of ways. For example, right after you leave the beach and you go in and the woman, it's kind of the setup moment and the woman says, Annabelle?
Annabelle?
Excuse me?
Annabelle, it's me, Esther.
Oh, no, I'm not Annabelle.
Are you sure?
My name is Elizabeth. Do I know you?
Elizabeth? Isn't that a lovely name?
That was odd.
So I started piecing together maybe like what the AD stood for, kind of before that. But what I didn't see coming, obviously, was how that was structured and how that was actually manifested in this particular
I was really focused on the bloody nose stuff, and when you start encountering characters that are dead in some other timeline and are stuck in this, so I figured it was going to end up being this you were dead all along, in the real timeline.
Sixth Sense, or
like we brought you back into this timeline because you're really dead here, and that's why and I thought it was going to play a lot more on that. I also thought that the confrontation with Comstock was going to end up a lot different than it did.
Yeah.
Where it's just like press X button to interrupt, and I was like, oh, I should probably interrupt. I didn't realize by interrupt I meant drown his ass and kill him right then and there. I was like, oh.
But that's another one of those like not boss moments.
Yeah.
And the other thing about that is that it ties together this whole idea, because you're drowning him right there, and it ties together to the whole idea of baptism.
Yeah, I mean, the water is a recurring theme throughout this. So when the boss fight or the final battle, one of the things that struck me is not that it goes into its final story, but how fast and almost brutal the transition is where suddenly you're in Rapture.
The Whistler! Elizabeth! The bird, Elizabeth! I lost control! He's coming!
No, he isn't.
And that, I mean, it was, that was, I was like, he did it. I cannot believe this game just did what I did not expect it to do.
And Elizabeth looks so remarkably powerful at that moment.
She now owns it.
Yeah, she's like, the siphon is gone, and suddenly, boom, there is no transition. It's almost like she knows everything now and sees everything and
she can
control
perceive
everything.
all of that
right.
stuff. Yeah.
So it's really powerful.
And I think to connect it back to the original BioShock, is just say that that trip to Rapture. There's a man, a city, and a lighthouse.
Yeah.
And that's they can. It's the sort of thing that you almost wish Final Fantasy did in some weird way, where they are kind of setting up these new universes over and over again. Like if there was some thread through them, how cool would that be?
And I felt as Booker that I was already dead at that point. That somehow her immersions, it's not that she now owns the narrative. She now just shows the narrative to be false every single time it's told.
Yeah.
And that, my time in this story is now over. And there was something so poignant about just going through the doors and seeing more lighthouses.
Right. And then there's the very first line you hear in the game is, "Are you afraid of God? No, but I'm afraid of you." And then to me that suddenly makes all much more sense, given that moment of Elizabeth's power where it's so clear.
And I think also the idea that there's always a lighthouse, there's always a man, and then when you're walking through and you can see the other Bookers and the other Elizabeths, I really felt it was also reminding people what's so unique about video games is that you are, and when you're playing a game, you have a unique agency and a narrative that no other narrative form actually affords you.
Right.
And that's also that sense of universality.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't understand. I felt like a great amount of futility at that point. It's like at the end of the game, it's like they drown Booker and the different Elizabeths disappear and all that sort of stuff, but do they really stop anything? Like probably not, because if there's an infinite number of doors and an infinite number of lighthouses and all this other stuff,
all you're doing it off.
Right. All you're doing is creating another timeline, right?
But
you're not stopping it.
Yeah.
Because nothing can stop it.
But there's something so inevitable and essential about them having to drown Comstock DeWitt.
Right.
In the water. I found it such a powerful image that it's almost like that's the only way that you can liberate the woman is you have to drown the man.
Yeah.
And that it really, in that regard, I think it does flow back, not so much to a unique American perspective, but just kind of things that have been committed, throughout history in the name of, typically white colonial men just trying to sort of own these stories and stuff. And that makes it such a profound image.
Yeah.
So the coda at the very end, where he walks through the door, I'm of the mind, I'm the English major, that you can't draw any meaning from that. It's just kind of, it almost is playing on your need to have resolution out of this game.
Maybe, but the way, this subject has come up a lot in the discussion, because there are two things I think that ties to. Number one is when you're traveling from place to place, somebody said to me, well, that just means Elizabeth is creating a new reality. But if they're already infinite realities, they're one and the same. Creating a new reality and it already existing is pretty much the same thing, because infinite plus one is still always infinity, right?
There will always be a Booker in that room.
Right.
And I think the idea that you're restarting the game, it's the new absolution. Like, maybe this time I can do it right. I think it's a very human desire to want to just kind of atone for the things that we probably can't fully absolve ourselves for.
Which is thematically relevant in this particular game, obviously. But then there's the other part of that, which is, to me, Elizabeth is gone, but that doesn't mean Anna is gone. The only realities you've affected are all the ones where Elizabeth was Elizabeth, but not the ones where Booker has actually had a child.
Yeah.
So that's, to me, what it's hearkening back to, is that this is the original hope of a child, which is, Booker still has Anna, and there's a new reality to be formed there.
A new story.
So.
But who's the guy under the hood in the lighthouse at the very beginning of the game?
Yeah.
Why does Elizabeth have these powers to begin with? Like that's the sort of stuff that,
I mean,
you know,
and I think it's to the game's credit for not answering all of that, because I don't think we would have enjoyed this discussion as much as we just did right here. We're going to stop down with this episode of Spoiled Games. I would like to thank Kevin VanOrd, senior editor at GameSpot, and Jeff Gerstmann, editor-in-chief at Giant Bomb. You can read both of their reviews at their respective sites. There'll be a little thingy on the bottom with the www letting you know. But get ready, because next week, or if you're watching this months from now, right now, there's a second Spoiled Game with these two fine gentlemen. We will be talking more about the gameplay and its mechanics, because believe it or not, we didn't touch on any of that. Thanks for watching Spoiled Games.